Hello everyone, welcome yet again to another day in this The Clown Decade, and I can finally do a video that's a little bit more relaxed because last week was very heavy and I need a break from heavy topics. So we're doing classic generational war stuff yet again, where Politics Joe went around vox-popping boomers for their advice to zoomers. And I'm not going to lie, most of the time I hear boomers talking about zoomers, I actually agree with the boomers a lot more than I do the zoomers, being pretty much a zoomer myself. Some people say I'm slightly old and just a very young millennial. Personally, I think I'm this secret third thing that a lot of people born in 1996 end up filling the role of, where we're not quite millennials because we're not that hipster, but we're not quite zoomers because we actually do have memories before smartphones and the internet were a massive part of our lives. So anyway, with that, let's see what the boomers have to say.
Don't spend every penny that you've got. Think about saving.
Yeah, zoomers absolutely hate this one because effectively they always try and say, oh, it was easier in your days, houses were cheaper, etc, etc, completely forgetting that actually these boomers had more expensive necessities and, of course, luxuries, at least, of course, compared to their wages. And actually, given that interest rates were much higher back then, it was actually harder to get a mortgage. In fact, really, the best way people actually managed to get on the property ladder was thanks to Margaret Thatcher's right to buy, which effectively made your council tax a bit cheaper. Either way, getting to the point, yeah, it's good advice. Zoomers absolutely do spend on themselves an awful lot, and I'm fed up with people pretending that they don't. The amount of them that I hear saying, oh, I can't be bothered to cook because I actually pay for it in time, and that's time I'm not willing to give to cooking. Yeah, the boomers are basically right, and this is a hard lesson that I think an awful lot of millennials had to go through in their 20s and 30s.
That's the advice. If you want to get on the housing ladder, you've got to work hard, you've got to save your money and not get out on that.
One thing that is funny to me, though, is that a lot of boomers seem to think that zoomers are going out spending their money on alcohol. Zoomers are actually drinking less alcohol pretty much than any other generation, partly because alcohol's so expensive these days due to all the tax on it. However, from what I understand, a lot of zoomers are in fact going down the route of much easier to get for under 18-year-olds products that are still illegal, such as, say, weed, even vapes, though I think they're getting banned. Well, the disposable ones are anyway. They're also not necessarily illegal, but still. Nitrous oxide, you'll see the little canisters of them around street corners and things like that. I see them all the time. But still, the abstract point is still true. I did it myself. You get on the housing ladder by getting a decent job, and my wage has never been above median. And I was quite lucky in lockdown because I had nothing to spend my money on. But it is difficult, there's absolutely no doubt about that, so I do have some sympathy for zoomers, but at the end of the day, if you are hearing the advice of save your money and don't be so decadent and replying to it with, but why should I, you're already falling at the first hurdle. I lose sympathy.
What do you think it's like to be a young person in the UK right now?
Horrendous.
Yeah, it feels pretty bad, and unfortunately an awful lot of them are turkeys voting for Christmas, especially those that are quite ambitious. Hence you have an awful lot of these influencers who are on TikTok and the like, effectively saying, leave the country, move to Thailand, something along those lines. And I can completely understand why.
The sooner AI takes over and the human race just disappears, the better, and I'm quite serious about that.
Well, the old boomer adage of, oh, I don't really care, I'll be dead anyway, but I want the human race to go with me. This woman probably votes Green, by the way.
What do you think it's like to be a young adult in the UK right now?
I think it's quite scary. It's very pricey around here to own a house.
Well, yeah, you're in the southeast. This is in Sussex, by the way. So I'm not surprised it's very expensive. I suppose that's another adage I should include with how I managed to afford a house. I moved to Wales, where it's incredibly cheap. I also tend to prefer the countryside, which a lot of people say is quite hypocritical, because I also quite like urban centres when they actually look quite nice and even have skyscrapers. I go back and visit Manchester every now and then, so it's hardly hypocritical. But anyway, yeah, it is certainly an issue that people are not able to afford houses where their parents have bought in the southeast, and absolutely no one seems to actually want to bring up a big reason for that, which is, well, immigration. Because again, the people most likely to think that immigration is not an issue is young people. So again, I completely lose sympathy. If you are not willing to actually engage with why the world is the way it is, then why should I have any sympathy for your voting patterns and the position you keep voting yourself into? To be fair, I don't even think that's necessarily true. nobody who voted Tory wanted the world we have now, and yet it's the one we got. But still, it's not exactly like voting for left-wing alternatives is helping, because that's what forced the Tories left and into these stupid positions.
Almost a quarter of young people are dissatisfied with life in the UK.
Not gonna lie, that's not even remotely close to what I thought it would be. Only 25% are dissatisfied. That's actually much lower than is typically implied by an awful lot of people who comment on Generation Z. From the way people chat, you'd think basically all of them are suicidal. Well, turns out it's not even a quarter.
1 in 8 aren't in full-time education or employment, and those who are still can't afford to move out or buy a house.
I mean, when you actually talk to Boomer or Gen X parents about moving out, typically it's moving in with some friends at first in a house they all rent together. And obviously the problem you have there is that is happening today, it's just happening for an awful lot longer. And parents are typically letting their kids stay at home for longer because they're in bigger houses with less kids. And so there's actually the room and space for it. And actually an awful lot of people do not charge their kids rent. I mean, to be fair, my parents did, but my God, it was discounted. And the idea of that, from what I can tell, is to help their kids save.
And with Keir Starmer reinstating the winter fuel allowance for pensioners with an income up to 35k, it's not hard to see why some young people don't think it's very fair.
I mean, yeah, to be fair, it's absolutely ridiculous how much for geriocracy that we live in. Just the whole of the UK at the moment is effectively a housing market with an NHS attached. And guess what? Both of those massively benefit, boomers who owned property from the 70s onwards. And the winter fuel payment is just direct redistribution to a lot of people who are already some of the richest people going. And yes, I know Reform was asking for a reinstatement of the winter fuel allowance. I am only on board with it insofar as using it to attack Labour's stupid decisions to pay Mauritius to take land off us, and effectively as a way of saying, please stop giving money to these stupid projects, policies in other countries, and instead actually fund Brits. That is about as far as I go as being sympathetic to that.
But are they really more hard done by than older generations? We've come to Rustington in West Sussex, which has the oldest median age of any town in the UK at 56, to find out.
Yeah, no wonder that woman couldn't afford anywhere. It's basically a retirement home, which are typically very expensive because these people have a lot of wealth that, again, they keep putting into the property market. What for? Largely inheritance purposes. Because let's be real, once they get to a point, they sell up and get moved to a care home by their kids, and that's probably going to happen for, well, quite a while longer.
What's it like to be a young person here?
It's nice, it's very communal, and everyone kind of knows one another as you walk down the street, which is nice, and you can walk down the road, walking the dogs, oh hello, hi Mildred, how you doing? So yeah, which is nice.
I am not shocked that relatively expensive places tend to be high trust and sociable societies.
What do you think it's like to be a young person right now in the UK?
Very difficult. I think the cost of living is making life difficult, and the biggest problem around here is the cost of housing. It's always been a bit more expensive. Because there's so much building going on, people selling up in London and just close to London, so they're making a big profit and they're coming on down here.
Sorry, they're selling up for a profit because there's building work going on around them. That doesn't make too much sense. The building work around them by definition would make their house price go down. I think what's actually happening is the people in London are getting fed up of, let's call them their new neighbours, and are selling up to move to somewhere that quite clearly is not getting an awful lot of their new neighbours. And this is part of the reason house prices are increasing in areas like this, because of the old dubbed white flight. And this is part of the reason places in Essex and of course here in Sussex, the house prices are higher than even in some places in London. And most people are only able to afford a place in London due to ridiculous social housing costs. Ridiculous in that they're very cheap and very subsidised, which are mostly taken up by foreign-born people. Anyway, back to that woman at the beginning who was saying AI needs to take over and the human race needs to go extinct.
But then I'm old and I've got great-grandchildren and I'm sure they're not that, well, they're only little, obviously. Well, they're only little.
Yeah, no, I cut it out of this, but obviously. But you basically just said, oh, it'll be a good thing if they die along with everyone else. I know Richard Tice said it the other day in one of his interviews, but at least he then instantly followed it up with, oh, here's policy that will answer the whole problem of the rapid demographic change. This woman, I have no idea what she's trying to say. She knows she's just said, I want my great-grandkids to die, but what's going to be a pivot?
I think it's very hard for them. We've had it relatively easy. We could buy a property when was it? late 60s. We bought just a little flat, but it was relatively easy.
Again, this is one of those things that I think it's a bit of survivor bias. There are old people that still live in council houses. There are old people that never quite managed to get on the property ladder, and there are old people that have basically had to rely on state handouts their entire life. The problem you always have is that the only people that ever get interviewed are the old people who won big in life. I mean, how many people had mortgages in the 70s? Probably not actually as many as we have now, despite all the economic hardship we find ourselves in. Partially because interest rates are basically 0%. I mean, obviously they're about 4% now, but obviously that's only been the case for about 5 years, and most people will be on mortgages they got before them. And I was not one of those lucky people.
Now it's impossible. It's just impossible.
Well, again, it's not. It's just difficult. It may be more difficult than the 70s or the 60s. I don't really know. But it is always forgotten that there are actually poor pensioners who have never owned a house. So one thing we do know, though, is that home ownership has gone up over time. So in some ways it probably was easier than it was. But it's obviously got harder now. But is it harder than the 70s? Hard to say.
We have got a granddaughter who's just got on the housing ladder, and she's only 24. Wow. But then again, she doesn't go out and party much. She saves quite well, works hard, saves well. So,
I mean, to be fair here, I can understand the Zoomer retort here, which is, well, we can't afford to go out anyway and we're barely saving. To which, again, my only reply is, we'll get a better job. That's what I did.
We have got 5 grandchildren, and I feel very sorry for them as they're growing up and trying to buy a house and live.
Again, it is quite funny that everyone will say, oh, housing prices, cost of living, these are two massive issues we have at the moment, and absolutely no one will mention one of the biggest reasons we have that issue, which is immigration. Either because they're right-wing and don't want to sound racist, or because they're left-wing and like open borders. There seems to be basically no in-between.
Do you think it's more difficult for your grandchildren being young adults than it was when you were a young adult or the same age?
Oh, 100 times worse.
It's funny, quite a lot of old people I know, that they're sympathetic to the position a lot of younger people are in, but a lot of the time you will just hear stories about how they were struggling. Moved into a house, couldn't afford carpet for 2 years, moved into a house, couldn't replace the windows for 3, and they were blown. Didn't have central heating, things like this. Which is something else that's never brought up when it comes to house prices. The quality of houses these days, yes, I'm even including new builds, are actually far better than they were from houses built in the 70s onwards. Hell, you can still get pictures of Edinburgh in the 70s and they still have horse-drawn carts in the streets. It's actually kind of incredible the progress made to people's living standards over the 20th century. It's night and day.
Because it was easier, as I say, to work, to save money, get a job.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm going to before the Labour government, obviously. The job market's just crashed. But even under the Tories, there were like 1 million vacancies or something like that. You could have got jobs. And I hate to say it as well, but even working's easier than it's ever been. I'm not even joking about that. Even when I was working in a shop, the expectation of you did not appear to be particularly high. You know, I remember being given targets of, oh, finish this cage in 40 minutes. It would always take over an hour. And then moving to office jobs. Nobody cares if you end up on Twitter for half your day, as long as you get your work done. Working's easier, okay, in terms of how it pays. Is it more or less than the 70s? Well, it's almost certainly more than the 70s. Wage stagnation only really started occurring from around the 2000s. I suppose the biggest kind of knife in the gut to the young people was effectively we were all put on this railroad from, right, you got to go from primary school to a good secondary school, then you got to do well at your GCSEs, then you got to do well at your A-levels, now you're railroaded to a uni of your choice to finally do a subject you actually care about, and that should easily get you some sort of grad scheme. Took me about 3 years to find mine, and I know other people who got into grad schemes that are either very good and very much what they wanted, or they ended up in grad schemes that were basically just glorified admin jobs and basically still aren't happy. But the people I know that were happiest were the ones who were definitely had their head in the game and got to any grad scheme that they could as soon as possible, doing summer internships and things like that. I was not one of those people. Many people were like me and didn't really know what to do with their lives after uni, and that's where it gets difficult. But ultimately, you don't really know what your other choices are throughout your life, you just think, throughout your young life, I should say, you just know, do well in school and you should easily get a job, generally it'll be one you want. But then you get to the real world and it's, no, actually, you have to make yourself marketable to these particular skills that everyone wants. And luckily, I had an awful lot of those skills, but as I say, not everyone does. And it can be a shock to some people. I'd say that's largely where young people are being shafted. They're given a completely wrong idea of how life is going to be, and I don't think it's good for them.
Do you think that it's all about personal decisions for how to save money as a young person, or do you think there's something else that the government could be doing? What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Of course the government could do something like they did in 1948 or whenever it was, when they built loads and loads of council houses.
Gibbs. Why? Why is the answer always Gibbs? Oh, the problem you have with building council houses nowadays, it probably wouldn't be too bad in 48, but it would be bad now because most of them do not go to British natives. A lot of them, especially in London, go to the foreign-born. And most council houses will have to be built in London, because that's where people want to go. On the bright side, at least, it'd help with the supply issue. But no, go into planning law. Go into abolishing the green belt so it's easier to build on brownfield sites. Fine, keep the green areas, absolutely. I'm not advocating for skyscrapers in the Cotswolds as much as people want to meme me into that position. And even on top of that, we are talking about buying a house. Why would... I guess it's a supply side thing, but why would having more council houses allow more people to buy houses? I guess the argument can be you live in there for 5 years, you get right to buy. But again, that's just subsidising demand yet again. Right to buy was absolutely a good political choice by Thatcher, by the way, but if people think the problem from that was that there were less council houses, they are sorely mistaken. The issue was, and still is, the Town and Country Planning Act, which basically makes it impossible to build and has only made it harder in the 2010s to 2020s.
That's the problem. Council houses got sold off. They never put any money into building houses, and they keep going on about
Well, yeah, they didn't need to. You had net emigration at the time, for God's sake, and population increase was mostly, in fact only, coming through from the birth of children who don't need houses for like 18 years, and it wasn't that large. The main reason you end up in a massive housing crisis is because we've had millions upon millions of immigrants coming over since around the 2000s. So this whole thing of, it's all solved with council housing, I mean, my brother goes on about this all the time, and it just makes me mad. The issue isn't just council houses. I mean, maybe you could build quite a few. I don't know the numbers on this exactly, but for a start, I want to make it very clear, because again, everyone memes me out of this position as well. Obviously, put the interest rates back to the historical norms of 5% or above, so that we're not making borrowing money the cheapest thing ever anymore, because that's ruined our economy. Secondly, obviously, the immigration problem. Sort that net zero or below, like Reform are saying, that will be ideal. And then, finally, completely reform the planning system so that it's easier to build. And as the result of much lower house prices, obviously the house pricing signal will not be what it was, and so there'll be less need for the supply side to build like they are anyway. But it's such an NPC line to say, council houses, that'll solve it. No, it won't. It might marginally bring the house prices down, but ultimately, if you've still got the hundreds of thousands of people being brought over by Labour, and you still have, although they're not quite where they were, but you still have the target being reduce interest rates, you're still going to have ludicrously expensive houses, because at the end of the day, they're an appreciating asset.
There's one thing about Russington, they're building far, far too many houses and not doing much about the infrastructure.
So they are building houses. My God. They'll be building houses because it'll be a commuter town to London, by the way. But the infrastructure is also very funny, because these people will typically be NIMBYs. They'll get the housing through, and then they'll say, we need infrastructure, and then want to stop the infrastructure as well. Again, I've said it for quite some time, but I don't think we'd have the NIMBY problem we have now if we didn't have the massive amount of immigration going on. A lot of people basically don't want houses built because they feel like it will just instantly be brought up by a foreigner. I'm not even joking.
And out of the houses they build, everywhere you look, lots and lots of 4-bedroom houses that cost a lot of money. Youngsters can't afford them.
The old affordable housing malarkey as well, that's another issue. To most people, all that translates to is effectively crack den. And to be honest with you, it doesn't even really matter. Any house being built will help with the supply side issue, so this is just typical left-wing NPC talking points that I can't really be bothered with. They build plenty of 2 to 3 bedroom new builds. It's not an argument to have some 4 bedrooms built in a really nice area where people will pay millions to buy them.
Would that be your advice to Keir Starmer, to build more council housing?
Yeah, build plenty of houses. Not just saying affordable houses. There's got to be houses that people can rent, that affordable rents, because not everybody. There's a lot of young people that have got jobs that are on low wages, so they can't afford to go out and buy a house, even if it's just a couple of $100,000.
If you end up building houses, the rent prices will obviously be affected too. So kind of, a non-starter there. Again, I'm fine with building houses. It's just, it's the third step in my kind of, I don't know, well, I guess 3-step plan.
I mean, I own my flat, but I would absolutely love to, move into a house at some point, and I just don't really think it's on the cards for me, and I don't think it's on the cards for pretty much a majority of young people at the moment. I
mean, I will say this as well. It certainly gets easier when you have a dual income. In fact, it's pretty much necessary. I think this is something that's missing from people's analysis too. A lot of young people seem to be talking about owning a house or a flat by themselves. That basically never happened in the past. If you were buying a house, you were typically buying a house for a family. You were rarely doing it for yourself, and if you weren't doing it for a family, you were buying it effectively with other friends, though typically you'd be renting, actually, in that case. I don't know why people are expecting to be able to afford 1 to 2 bedroom houses alone. There's one guy I know who has managed to do that, and it's in a not particularly nice area of Liverpool. And this is the other thing, people just aren't willing to actually have the quality of life you need to be able to afford a house, because either it's going to be a massive fixer-upper you can't afford, or it's going to be in an area that isn't particularly nice and you don't want to live anyway. So while there has been an awful lot of decline in the UK over the past few decades, this is something that I have been hearing about since 2008. It's been nearly 20 years of this. Sorry, but at some point we just have to admit that things are not going to be like they were in the 90s and 2000s, where buying property was very easy, and effectively try not have such a stigma around, say, renting. Or I understand not wanting to play into some declinist narrative, but frankly we also have to admit that sometimes there was just 20 years of ridiculous economics that never should have happened in the first place. You can improve absolutely everything and get it beyond what things were like in the mid-2000s. But we might have to sacrifice the ideal situation to buying a home from there. Again, it's not even impossible. It's just very difficult. And frankly, it was historically normal to be renting out a family home for life. And in some ways, it's even cheaper than owning a home, as I have been learning for the past 2 years.
So yeah, I mean, it's very pricey around here. To own a house. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I would have really hoped that Labour would have put that at the top of their agenda, but I just don't think it's happening, unfortunately.
I mean, the problem is that I know exactly what her thoughts are with what Labour should do. Oh, more council homes, that's what I want. You're still renting council homes. I never really get that argument. But realistically, what you actually have to do to fix the whole housing market, which this whole video has been about, is do 3 things that are incredibly unpopular. Increase interest rates, well, no one wants to do that because it might make mortgages more expensive. Okay, but it brings your house prices down as well. The exact opposite of the 2 things people want. 2, it's reduce immigration, which, to be fair, actually, I'm wrong. People do massively want that, actually. It's just the government has never managed to actually get around to doing it. And then finally, get rid of the Town and Country Planning Act. Once again, there's a lot of people who want the country to basically be a living museum. But ultimately, you can make the country a hell of a lot better by getting rid of that and actually protecting places of outstanding natural beauty a lot better. But hey, there we go. Is she going to say any of this? No, it's probably just going to be council homes, please.
Do you think that Keir Starmer does represent young people's interests and is helping young people?
Definitely, yes. I definitely think so from the start of the election.
Okay, who is this guy and is he a Labour councillor?
He is a magnificent Prime Minister, and I believe he wants to believe in the young people's futures, whether it's going to be acting, working retail, etc.
Yeah, man, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think Labour are going to do too well in council elections. I just cut the slack here and try and join the Greens or something. Actually, no, where are you? You're in the southeast. Join the Lib Dems.
If you could ask Keir Starmer to put in place one policy to help young people, or ask him to do one thing for young people, what would it be?
I would say level up the town, I would say.
Who is this guy? I've never seen an NPC like this. He has given absolutely no reasoning as to how Starmer has helped. He's just said, yeah, he's good. Yeah, I think he's good because I think he's good. And then asked, oh, what policy do you want to improve the place? He's like, oh, just make it better. That's all he said.
Definitely level up. It's leveling up for quite a while now, and we need more money into the towns because a lot of shops are closing down. For example, Littlehampton at the moment.
Who is this guy? Oh, yeah, the government just needs to put more money into the place to stop shops closing down. Just absolutely no thought behind policy. Just, again, more Gibbs. Typical Labour supporter, really.
And it'd be nice to have more opportunities, such as lots of pay rises.
Yeah, maybe for the public sector. I didn't get one. What the hell is this guy talking about? Oh my god. I don't... People call me bad with reform, and I totally understand that I am very much an activist and very open about that. I don't think I'd ever be this crazy. I don't think it's possible.
Lots of... I don't know, really.
Yeah, I'm just leaving this guy there. He has absolutely nothing to add, and literally could only manage 2 platitudes. That's all he could manage. That's incredible. Your NPC software cannot get past 2 talking points that in any way were positive. That is unbelievably bad. No wonder you're getting destroyed.
Well, I think when I was young, my generation had it good. We didn't have all the mod cons they got now, but we didn't have the pressure of finance and things like that. No mobile phones or nothing.
No, sure. Luxuries were incredibly expensive and you just never even bothered to try and buy them. However, necessities were actually more expensive as a percentage of your income. You know, sure, bread was like 5p or something, but at the end of the day, you were being paid about 20 quid a week or something like that. Whereas nowadays, your bread's about £1, but you're being paid about £450 a week or something like that. Basically, food's a hell of a lot cheaper. Your necessities are cheaper by your housing. Even your energy's cheaper, for God's sake. And a hell of a lot more efficient, despite this government trying its best to do the opposite. So while he's right that there wasn't as much need for luxuries such as games consoles, TVs, PCs, laptops, iPads, whatever, these things are incredibly cheap and can cost around, you know, a week's worth of salary, maybe even 2. Whereas back in the day, these things would cost years' worth of your salary. So basically, again, it's not particularly an argument I'd buy into, and in fact it shows the opposite of decline.
But now I think they have a very difficult task, the young generation, like getting a mortgage, getting a home. A lot of them live with their parents because they can't afford to, you know.
I mean, again, just throwing it out there, I could probably afford rent if I moved in with some of my friends. The other problem you have is that an awful lot of jobs are a lot more mobile now. Most people I know moved to London. Oddly enough, they moved into the same houses together or same flats together. My brother did that as well. My sister, she actually managed to buy an apartment herself, but she only managed to do that by renting out one of her rooms, and then eventually when she got a boyfriend, or a long-term one that the family actually knew about, I should add, who is now her husband, I would add too, ended up moving in with her and obviously contributed towards the bills. Again, as I was saying before, it's very rare to actually be able to afford a house or anything with more than 2 bedrooms on one salary alone, and that's basically never been affordable. Even when your middle class person did it on one salary back in the day, it was still quite difficult to do. And in fact, I heard stories where the wife would effectively have to take part-time cash-in-hand work, I don't mean prostitution by the way, to help make ends meet. Again, it's always been somewhat difficult, and I'm trying to work out why it's all seemed to be this particular generation that everyone's all of a sudden sympathetic toward. And really all I can put it down to is that a lot of boomers feel sorry because they sold the young on a false promise. That's what a lot of it seems to come down to. I mean, I'm nearly 30 now. I'm kind of past this point in life where I'm complaining about house price and things like that. I still do and worry about it, obviously. But looking back on it with 2020 vision, it was actually all quite easy, largely because of my parents being a massive help and letting me live at their home for years for subsidised rent, effectively. Not everyone has that, and I completely understand that I'm in a very good position, and have been most of my life, but even people I know who weren't necessarily in the best position ever, they're making it work and not making it work too badly. The people who've ended up in the best position, by the way, that I can see are people who've migrated, frankly. People who've either moved to Canada or Australia in their 20s seem to be the happiest people that I know. And people that did incredibly well ended up moving to America and are very happy there. But they're in their 30s typically. But I always get some pushback on that, and this is the problem with making generalities. Especially when it comes to your average Zoomer's life. There's such a wide, broad berth of people's different life experiences that really all you can do when listening to me here is take what I tell you from my own experience at face value, and obviously the anecdotes I know as well. But I'm sure plenty of you have your own stories that I want you to put in the comments as well, because I want to broaden my horizons on this particular topic, because I definitely used to be house prices should be lower, just build everywhere, that's what we need to do immediately. Whereas in reality, actually, it's all a bit more complicated than that. And then when you start thinking quite deeply about it, you start to think, are things really as bad as they were in the past? Or were we just having our expectations quite high because of the world that we grew up in? And I think it's actually more the latter.
But then I suppose that's down to the government, isn't it? It's very tricky. But all I would say is, I believe my generation, I'm 85 now. I was born in 1940 and during the war, and things were rationed. We had it really hard. So I think nowadays it's easy for my generation to adapt.
I think this guy's just made the strong men make good times argument, but in terms of we're the strong men who had to go through rationing and a load of other terrible times in the mid-20th century, and therefore we can adapt easier, whereas basically we've now made weak people who can't adapt as easily. But at the same time he's trying to be sympathetic towards that, which I don't know why you would be, but there we go.
Whereas if the younger generation have not been through those hard times, they got other hard times, So yeah, that's about it really.
Yeah, but our hard times effectively comes down to, if you can't afford a house, typically you'll be staying with your parents, which ultimately is still quite easy. I mean, obviously you want your freedom and all that, and I completely understand that. But at the other end of the spectrum, that's a much, much better situation to be in than just being thrown out to the street. I still remember the threat from my dad the whole time was effectively once you're 18, you're out the door, and then you actually come back from uni at 21, and it turns out that's not the case. I wasn't even massively forced to get a job, really. The main reason I actually ended up getting one was effectively just because I came bored of the nagging from my parents. But actually, you work hard within whatever chosen career path you have, and you eventually end up in a relatively easy state if you end up lucky enough. Obviously, there's not as much choice in that. You obviously have to be in a pretty decent sector that looks to have good career opportunities, but managing to get in that, life does become easier, and I don't think we really tell kids that enough. And we certainly don't give them a realistic standard on it. At least we didn't when I was growing up. Because as I say, you just feel like you're going to be railroaded through life, and that's not true after 21.
What advice would I give the government? To look after the younger generation, because the younger generation are the future of this country.
Yeah, that's nice, and I largely agree on all that, but can we have something a bit more specific?
My generation, we're on our way out now, but look after the young generation.
Great, I can't really glean anything from that. Yes, I want good thing too. This is a problem when it comes to making policy, by the way. It then all just has to come down to vibes. What sounds good, and then what can you realistically do to make that good sounding thing good policy? And this is a problem that Tories have had for ages, and they've failed to actually implement anything good. Now Labour are coming in and implementing everything bad that sounded good. You need a total system change to help people understand effectively how all these things interconnect and work within government, the private sector, and, well, just reality in general. But, as is the old Starship Troopers line, that which is given has no value, votes are given, so people don't value them, and so people don't value the education that you might need to actually vote quite well, because at the end of the day, you can just vote for Gibbs. And unfortunately, even the right-wing parties are having to somewhat get involved with that sort of thing, because you can't change anything about the system if you don't have power at the end of the day.
We have had a lovely time to live. I'm glad I'm not young. I'm glad I'm not young anymore.
Well, from the sounds of it, you're advocating for everyone to die. Oh, I had my good time, now everyone else should die because it got slightly harder. Great. AI, by the way, definitely seems to be where tech's heading, and definitely is the sort of thing that is going to increase productivity and prosperity. It's definitely the type of thing that the government should be focusing on. Starmer hasn't completely ruined it, but really, if you wanted to, you'd be making policies that makes it easier to, say, connect Cambridge and Oxford to actually allow them, the universities and the private sector, to focus on growth in tech and AI. And we actually do have an awful lot of talent in the tech sector. It's just an awful lot of them, especially people I know, are thinking of moving, or already have in fact. So I'd look at trying to reverse that, but does anyone on the street say that? No. This is an absolutely massive problem with democracy and universal suffrage, and one that, to some extent, I think is going to have to be fixed this century. God knows when, it could be at the end of it, but people want one thing and then tend to vote for another because that good thing gets hijacked by bad policy. Generally what happens, so we'll have to see how things go. Anyway, I think with that, that's everything I had for you for today, so do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also donate by becoming a channel member or leaving a super chat or super thanks. Thank you to the few members who became members this week. I've seen you commenting some of the old Laughing at the Guardian streams, so that's always funny to see. Speaking of shilling this week, obviously videos out as when I can make them. There is a Tosh News tomorrow over on the Worcester Club. There is some Nautica on Thursday, and there's a Laughing at the Guardian on Saturday, so do look forward to that. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.